The heavy iron outer hatch seals shut with an echoing, finalizing clank that distinctly reverberates through your bones. You are officially locked inside a 6 by 12-foot hyperbaric support ship, resting violently on the rolling deck of a massive offshore support ship. For the next 28 consecutive days, you will absolutely not see the sun. You will breathe a highly synthetic, carefully pure mixture of pure oxygen and helium that makes your voice sound utterly ridiculous, but explicitly keeps your hot blood from boiling under the crushing weight of the ocean. The smell of grease, sweat, and compressed air feels thick in your lungs. You look across the small metal room at your two dive partners. None of you speak. There is nothing left to say. You are about to become a creature of the absolute deep. You are a saturation diver, level 1. Your career does not start in the sprawling, majestic ocean. It begins in the sterile, heavily chlorinated confines of a commercial diving academy pool far away from the coast. You are a recent graduate of the program. But you quickly realize that standard recreational diving gear is meant for weekend hobbyists looking at shallow coral reefs in the Caribbean. You are explicitly a training to manually weld massive steel pipelines in complete pitch-black freezing darkness securely thousands of feet below the sparkling surface. The absolute unbreakable rigidity of the diving bell. It is your only elevator to the abyss end. And your only sanctuary that you sit tightly shoulder to shoulder with two other heavily geared men in a pressurized metal sphere no larger than a tiny commercial airplane bathroom. When the heavy winch eventually detaches you from the main support ship and you slowly descend 500 feet into the murky ocean, you fully grasp that there is absolutely no quick escape. If something goes critically wrong on the seafloor, you cannot simply tuck fins. You drop your heavy tool belt. The pressure differential is so incredibly massive that ascending without a week-long, strictly monitored decompression cycle would turn the nitrogen in your bodily fluids into a lethal bubbling foam, violently destroying your joints and brain in seconds. You fundamentally belong to the bottom now. Every single calculation you make, every breath you precisely draw, is directly tethered to the cold, hard mathematics of deep-water physics. The weight of this reality is staggering. You spend hundreds of hours just learning the emergency protocols for the bell alone. You are taught how to manually override the hydraulic winches, how to scrub carbon dioxide from the air using emergency if the surface loses power, and how to operate the heavy, clunky secondary life support systems while completely blindfolded. Your instructors are ruthless. Hardened veterans missing fingers and carrying deep scars, constantly screaming at you that the ocean will exploit a single moment of complacency. They flood your training bell with icy water in the middle of the night just to test your psychological breaking point. You do not sleep. You dream of the pressure slowly crushing the walls of your bedroom. Level 2. Your actual jump into the open water is utterly terrifying. The heavy bottom hatch of the bell forcefully opens to the absolutely freezing, churning black water of the untamed North Sea. You do not carry a traditional air tank on your back like a recreational diver. Your entire physical existence strictly relies on the umbilical. It is a massive, heavy, brightly colored rubber tether explicitly containing your breathing gas, your pressurized hot water suit supply, and your vital analog communications. You slide slowly into the heavy water. It is unimaginably cold, aggressively sapping the radiant heat from your core. The scalding hot water forcefully flushing through your thick rubber from the topside boiler is the single physical thing keeping your human heart beating steadily. You firmly grab the impossibly heavy underwater welding torch and begin to crawl slowly along the massive, slick steel pipeline buried deep in the seabed mud. You can see absolutely nothing beyond the faint, murky 2-foot beam of your helmet light. The sheer, overwhelming isolation is staggering. You are completely connected to the rest of humanity by a single plastic rubber hose. You must constantly ensure the umbilical remains entirely free of snags, sharp, jagged metal severing of that lifeline. One single terepsilling delic would mean suffocating alone in the dark. The actual physical labor is brutally taxing. You are conduct salt environment. A poorly insulated cable could send a fatal shock directly through your suit. You spend 9 hours straight cutting through twisted steel wreckage with a specialized exothermic torch, your muscles screaming in agony under the thick layers of rubber and heavy brass. The hot water system suddenly surges, sending a localized blast of near-boiling water against your left leg, leaving you with second-degree burns that you cannot treat you until you return to the surface weeks later. You learn to embrace the pain as an unavoidable byproduct of the extreme environment and begin to feel like an astronaut on Earth in an astronaut-level abandoned on a hostile alien planet. Level 3. The Rusted Snag. Year 3 of your deepwater career, you are executing a highly complex repair operation, working securely at 800 feet. The physical demanding work is agonizing. You are manually dragging incredibly heavy steel wrenches through deep water that feels as thick as wet molasses explicitly due to the incredible hydrostatic pressure. Your dense muscles constantly cramp under the heavy exertion. You are blindly moving around a massive, deeply rusted concrete piling when a remarkably strong sudden current forcefully hits your body. You entirely lose your footing in the slick mud and slide violently down into a tight, jagged crevice. You go to push yourself back out, but you cannot move. Your real life incipient with entirely undrop in your stomach. Your vital umbilical cord is geometry. Your vital cord is tightly wedged securely under a jagged piece of rusted metal grating directly behind you. Panic in commercial saturation diving is an immediate, indisputable death sentence. Your heart rate increases, causing you to burn rapidly through the precious oxygen and far too quickly. The analog communications line is crackling with static interference from the ship above. You tell topside about your squeaky, high-pitched helium voice completely betraying the expanding in from your chest. The dive supervisor replies calmly from the ship, sitting 800 feet above you on the dry deck, telling you to ask you to hold your position. You spend the next 45 agonizing minutes in complete freezing blackness. You slowly and meticulously contort your physical body backward to carefully unravel the massive heavy hose. Entirely aware that one sharp metallic edge could slice your air supply, every physical movement must be incredibly precise. The cold water inevitably creeps into the hairline fractures of your suit seals, making your entire body shiver. You finally miraculously untangle the hose from repeatedly rusting collection iron grating, hovering polymer bum grating. You pull yourself into the bell, feeling a cold realization that this environment does not care how much training you have. It will kill you whenever it decides the math is right. Level 4. The pressurized tube. The financial compensation is ludicrous. You are securely making thousands of tax-free dollars a day. However, the deeply hidden trade-off is your absolute humanity. You live strictly inside the pressurized residential transfer chamber for exactly weeks at a specific time. You eat processed, tasteless food forcefully shoved directly through a small, heavily secured airlock. You flush the tiny metal toilet using a mechanical valves. The profound psychological toll begins to warp your reality. You lean forward and stare out the incredibly small, ridiculously thick quartz viewport window of the chamber. You watch the regular ship walking on the steel deck, casually breathing the actual natural atmosphere, feeling the warm sun. They look like extraterrestrial aliens to you. You begin to feel vastly less like a natural human being and much more like a biological machine explicitly engineered to withstand the crushing weight of the ocean. You develop intense claustrophobia. You sit in a metal tube roughly the size of a minivan with 5 other grown men. The smell of a stale air and metallic machinery is permanently etched into your memory. You are physically incapable of standing all the way up without hitting your head on a heavy steel beam. Any petty argument between the divers is magnified 10,000 times by the inescapable confinement. 2 divers get into a screaming match over a perceived slight regarding a missing pair of dry socks. It nearly escalates into a physical brawl. You realize that out here there is absolutely nowhere to storm off, nowhere to hide, and nowhere to breathe fresh air. The only thing worse than the darkness outside the window is the suffocating tension inside the steel tube. Level 5. The blind ironwork. You are working far offshore in the deep Gulf of Mexico on a massive, severely damaged oil rig foundation torn apart by a devastating hurricane. You drop heavily from the open bell. The thick, muddy silt instantly kicks up forcefully off the bottom, immediately turning the surrounding water into an absolutely impenetrable, suffocating brown sludge. You literally cannot see your own heavy gloves holding the active welding torch directly in front of your thick glass faceplate. You spend the next 6 structural ironwork doing heavy 6 structural ironwork entirely by sheer touch. Your hands are completely numb, guided only strictly by extensive muscle memory and raw engineering instinct. The bright magnesium sparks from the underwater welding torch illuminate violently for a fraction of a second, aggressively creating terrifying, jagged, monstrous shadows before being swallowed whole by the black void. You start to actively hallucinate terrifying biological light just beyond the faint reach of your helmet light. The extreme sensory deprivation is effectively breaking your disciplined mind. You convince yourself that a massive predator is circling you in the dark. You constantly hear the terrifying sound of the massive steel structure groaning and shifting violently in the deep ocean currents above you. A 2-ton piece of hanging debris drops entirely out of the murky darkness, smashing directly into the seabed exactly 5 feet to your left. The concussive shockwave physically knocks you entirely off your feet, snapping your heavy tether violently taut. You are merely a microscopic flare, completely suspended entirely within an infinite volume of crushing liquid. You are deeply reliant entirely on your own wits and the distant, unseen hands of the surface team holding the other end of your fragile lifeline. There is no glory down here, only survival. Level 6, the Delta P nightmare. You finally encounter the absolute reigning nightmare of any deep commercial diving professional. Catastrophic differential pressure, known in the industry as Delta P. You are tasked with manually clearing a massive block concrete intake valve explicitly on a highly dangerous underwater dam structure. You are instructed clearly to ensure the massive hydraulic pumps are physically locked out and tagged securely topside before you approach the structure. The supervisor formally gives you the explicit green light. You swim cautiously toward the massive intake. Suddenly, you feel an increased aggressive, completely invisible heavy hand grab your entire body. The surrounding water current forcefully and unnaturally accelerates. Someone topside made a catastrophic, highly illegal operational mistake. The massive industrial pump is actually actively engaged. The physics of the ocean have suddenly weaponized against you. You fight directly against the overwhelming pull. You deliberately jam the heavy steel handle of your thick wrench forcefully against the hard lip of the concrete structure, using every ounce of agonizing, burning strength strictly in your arms securely to prevent your vulnerable body completely being heavily sucked directly into the narrow metal intake grate. If your chest physically hits that grate, the profound pressure differential will securely hold you there permanently, with clearly thousands of pounds of sheer inescapable force. You scream frantically into the comms, telling them to kill the power. It takes 30 agonizingly long seconds before the immensely painfully dies. You pull yourself desperately back safely to the bell. You pull yourself desperately, if it's broken. You fulfill your bell shivering. You sit inside the bell shivering, realizing the close proximity to your own demise. The topside engineer who made the terrible mistake is fired on the spot, but that entirely provides zero comfort. The incident permanently scars you. You begin to heavily distrust the very support team absolutely to securely keeping you alive, leading to incredibly tense, hostile radio communications during all subsequent dives. You double-check every single command given to you. You become air mixtures 3 times. You become perfectionist paranoid diver because you know the margin for error is absolutely 0. Level 7, the sunken graveyard. The daily job is not always smoothly fixing broken steel pipes. Sometimes the harrowing job is physically correctly retrieving exactly what the ocean violently swallowed. A highly pressurized commercial transport helicopter tragically dived down aggressively in the frigid North Sea carrying 12 offshore rig workers. You are immediately deployed directly to the sunken wreckage. The water is freezing, completely dark, and utterly hauntingly silent. You methodically locate the completely submerged aluminum fuselage, the metal camouflage, using sonar, plotting, and intuition. Metal is entirely terrifying enough, but exactly what you firmly find inside rapidly and permanently changes you. You are formally tasked with physically safely extracting the individual human victims. You must explicitly handle heavy bodies completely in zero gravity, aggressively navigating jagged, torn metal and floating hazardous debris. You do the job methodically compartmentalizing the profound human the profound human tragedy explicitly. The psychological toll of handling death in an alien environment is incredible. When you finally return to the council, with a irreparable, but it is entirely useless. You cannot explicitly explain the visceral terror of staring into the lifeless eyes of a drowned worker, suspended utterly motionless in the freezing water, illuminated solely by the narrow beam of your battery-powered torch. The image is seared into your cortex permanently. You begin heavily self-medicating with alcohol exclusively during your rare weeks off, desperately trying to drown out the horrible, vivid nightmares strictly fueled by the terrifying grave temperature at the bottoms of the icy sea. The isolation you felt in the belt follows you directly back into civilian society. Level 8. The Silent Blowout. You strictly are the highly respected lead diver actively on a deeply complicated, highly volatile deep-water structural intervention point. You are trying desperately to precisely cap a heavily leaking high-pressure pipeline explicitly on the absolute bottom of the world. You are straddling the incredibly massive heavy iron valve. Suddenly, the steel pipe powerfully shudders. A violent, concussive, devastating wave of compressed natural flash, the unseen force, like a freight, hits you literally like a roaring freight train, forcing you backwards violently perfectly into the heavy mud. Your brass helmet actively smashes hard against a jagged rock. The primary thick umbilical vital gas line is severely crimped actively by the heavily falling structural debris. The rhythmic hiss behind your head vanishes. Your primary breathing gas exactly cuts entirely off. The silence is the most terrifying sound you have ever heard. You definitively have exactly 2 remaining minutes of emergency compressed bailout gas, firmly strapped securely to your heavy back. You quickly, forcefully reach directly behind your neck and violently, actively crank the brass valve completely open. You desperately, completely crawl actively through the blinding, totally chaotic, churning storm of volatile gas bubbles and heavy mud explicitly directly securely toward the safety of the bell. Panic, aggressively, physically, consume incredibly precious oxygen. You physically move entirely with terrifying, precise mechanical efficiency, navigating physically purely explicitly by the distinct direction, exclusively, of the heavy umbilical pull. You beautifully firmly breach the heavy open hatch of the rescue bell. With exactly 10 seconds safely of breathable atmosphere left, you collapse on the floor grating, staring blankly at the ceiling. Level 9. The Microscopic Rogue. The human physical body was never explicitly designed comfortably to successfully endure this intense repeated pressure forever. You are definitively, actively, precisely in the final weeks safely of a massive structural intervention contract. You are quietly sitting completely inside the topside freight chamber, the topside living chamber, slowly beginning the agonizingly slow process, completely 4-day artificial atmospheric decompression pressure. On precisely sunny day 2, you vividly surface sports, Barini. You vividly feel it. A profound, entirely agonizing, distinctly dull ache deep inside the actual fickle marrow from your right shoulder joint. It is entirely definitely not a simple strained muscle cramp. It explicitly is a totally rogue dissolved nitrogen bubble physically placed exclusively inside your sensitive physical tissue, acute decompression sickness, the bends. You immediately alert the supervisor through the intercom. They absolutely entirely aggressively have to violently entire repressurize. The completely living chamber diving you deeply back, explicitly down physically to crush the rogue microscopic bubble precisely entirely. You endure completely grueling, deeply terrifying joint pain safely, fully explicitly aware accurately that if a heavy nitrogen bubble permanently migrates safely directly into exactly your brain or spinal cord, you could entirely securely suffer total irreversible paralysis. You spend another agonizing week in the chamber. The doctors carefully let back the surface atmosphere one torturous foot at a time. Your joints pop and crack audibly. When you finally step out of the heavy steel door onto the deck, your right shoulder is permanently degraded. The doctors inform you that your deep-sea diving career is officially over. The ocean finally exacted its ultimate toll on your biology, level 10. The coastal ghost, you are officially retired from the absolute deep. You are living in a quiet coastal town, managing a small, mundane logistics company far away from the brutal high-stakes environment. You wear long sleeves to cover the distinct decompression scars mapped across your forearms. You stand safely on the beach. You possess, looking out at the vast, rolling gray ocean. The civilian tourists around you simply see a beautiful, relaxing body of water perfect for sailing and swimming. You look at the exact same water and you see a massive, a completely terrifying, infinitely heavy crushing machine. You see endless darkness. You remember the exact feeling of the scalding hot water suit pressing against your frozen skin at 1,000 feet deep. You realize with a chilling finality that part of your soul never actually returned to the surface. It is permanently wedged under a rusted pipe in the mud, staring blindly into the void. You built an incredible physical. You made an absolute fortune of money, and you successfully survived the absolute harshest environment on the entire planet. But you will spend the rest of your life as a ghost on land. Every single time you hear the shark rhythmic hiss of an air compressor or the heavy steel clank of a closing door, your heart rate spikes, your breathing shallows, and you instinctively reach back for the heavy umbilical breathing line that is no longer there. I want you guys to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more deep dive reality checks of the most intense, unforgiving professions on Earth. Drop a comment below telling me exactly what brutal career you want me to cover next.